SBC participants, thank you for joining us. We have a fun and probably novel talk for many of you this go round, a topic that you've probably heard something about, but you probably haven't had the opportunity to this point to dig into and put some meat on the bone. So we have an expert in the concept of animal traceability. With us this go is Callahan Grund. Callahan is also a seed stock producer, comes from a background similar to many of you all, also understands and appreciates the benefit of continental cattle and continental composites. And so he very much understands many of you and your family's backgrounds. But his day job in his present life, as you can see on the screen, he is the executive director of a firm called U.S. CattleTrace. I could describe that a little bit, but he'll do it a lot better. So Callahan, thank you for taking the time to work with us. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Chip. I appreciate it. Hope everybody can hear me well on here. Appreciate the opportunity to meet, like you said, with a lot of folks that have a similar background and upbringing to what I had growing up that leads to a lot of possibilities, guys. I never thought I'd be in a job like this talking about animal disease traceability, but it is kind of funny where life leads you. I did grow up in western Kansas on a Gelbvieh balancer Sim-Angus seed stock operation where we do primarily market bulls to the commercial cattlemen. A lot of those continental composites are very popular in our neck of the woods. And so went to Kansas State after I was on a livestock judging trajectory, which I'm sure some of you may have some aspirations towards. Judged at Fort Scott Community College and then went on to Kansas State University. And while I was there, I got an internship at the Department of Ag. And the reason I'm telling you all this is kind of my why on how I got involved in animal disease traceability. When I was there, I thought, ag policy kind of might be my realm, something that I might be interested in. And I interned for the Secretary of Agriculture. We were fortunate in the state of Kansas to have that located just a block up the road from K-State campus north of Weber Hall there at the Animal Science Building. And so really working through that experience, the Department of Ag had a heavy push and trying to be the most prepared state in the nation for animal disease traceability. And I got there and was working for the Secretary of Ag, and she said, I think you really need to be involved on our ADT stuff. I think you'll be interested in it. And man, guys, I got on the inside and I went, wow, we are not prepared at all in the cattle industry. If a foreign animal disease type event were to occur, we're working in Kansas on the biggest, best preparedness, and I still didn't even feel like we were super prepared. And so CattleTrace kind of went through that, and I'll explain that during that time and kind of my evolution where it became. But, really my origin of getting involved in this was being prepared at that time, saying we need to be prepared as cattle producers, and they need to have cattle producers a part of all these discussions. So we'll get into this here a little bit. So I put this first slide up here at the U.S. beef export value per head. So I'm going to lead off with this. If you guys can kind of see this cattle fact slide here, $450 roundabout right now per head is attributed to the export market. That's a significant amount when you think about it from a perspective of how we market our cattle today. And so I'm going to set the tone with that as we continue to move forward and why this is important. So our global beef exports are located there as well. I did put this up here to showcase the countries out there. So in the world right now, in the global market, only 2 countries don't have major beef exporting countries, as you can see there, don't have a traceability system of a mandatory or voluntary use. That's us and India, as you can see on the screen there. And India primarily exports water buffalo. So when you look at it, really at that point, the U.S. is sitting by themselves out there with the only system that's not currently with the export market. So that's really important as we set the tone moving forward. Our current ADT system that we do have, I listed here, it's been in effect since March of 2013. Really all the cattle covered there. It would be this might be a good slide for you guys to study as you work through this, but all the sexually intact beef cattle 18 months of age or older, so all those breeding cattle that we move across state lines, dairy cattle, and then like if you guys go to junior nationals or anything of that sort, go to the National Western Stock Show, all those cattle used for rodeo and show and exhibition. So the accepted forms of ID right there, official ear tags, it can be metal or it can be a beat 40, which is the U.S. official designation. That 840 just means it's a U.S. official designation of an RFID tag. And then back tags and breed tattoos when accompanied with the CVI, vet form that you need to move across state lines. So that's what's currently there. So when we think about our ADT system there, we have kind of a big chunk of the puzzle missing, and that's a lot of the feeder cattle, the cattle that travel the most, honestly, within our country and feed the most directly into our beef supply chain. So when we kind of start looking at our ADT system, kind of like the old Atlas, Chip, you might remember when you were a judging coach back in your day, navigating the country with one of these folding atlases. Kids my age and younger now, they're just used to plugging it in on their phone. So when we look at our ADT system today, it's a lot of drawing lines, looking it up, putting it on paper, trying to piece together where these cattle may be across the board. Our thought and contention as a lot of cattle producers is, why can't ADT be like a GPS system? This animal is here, is around these ones, something like that. Our vision at U.S. CattleTrace is to be a producer-driven national leader in ADT, providing really that search engine, that data management system for a rapid disease response that's not only accepted by our producers in the U.S., but global consumers as well there. If you remember that first slide, we'll kind of talk about that here in a little bit. Our guiding principles. So when we start looking at what animal disease traceability is and the crux of it, I'm going to get forward to this. It's really contact tracing. So it's contact tracing for cattle. This used to be the hardest slide for me to explain to people when we first started the CattleTrace effort a few years ago. Then COVID happened and everybody knows what contact tracing is now. So you guys can see this slide here, but I'm sure if people or dealt with people who have been in contact traces with as it relates to COVID. So getting back to this, our guiding principles is to have minimal data collected, really having those four. When we set out here a few years ago with a pilot project to see if we could even build a system in the U.S. that works for producers, we said, okay, what's the minimal amount necessary, Mr. Animal Health Official, to get a successful trace done? They said, well, we need to know where that animal was, so that ID is important, where it was, and when it was there. So we collect the ID, then the location where it was at, and then the date, time of when it was there. That's it. Those four minimal data points, that's it. Our data privacy is paramount. We are a nonprofit organization today. Then we have a producer board of directors made up of representatives from the cow-calf, auction market, and feed yard sector. And they really determine who, when, and how that data can be accessed for contact tracing purposes. And then the last piece is hands-free speed of commerce. So we want this to operate in the background of the cattle industry as we move forward with some of those things. So as we get to the next slide, I'm going to put this up here as traceability simplified. Really think about this. We have the K-tag, the toll system in Kansas. I know some of your other states have that there as well. And that little sticker that we put up in our windshield, it picks it up and then they'll send us a bill later on down the road. Now, CattleTrace does not send any kind of bills there, but those tags are in that windshield and they operate in the exact same way. That is actually RFID technology and what we're going to call and talk about is ultra high frequency technology. So if we think about the typical flow of cattle through the cattle supply chain system today, let's just take a feeder steer, for instance, since this is what we're talking about with you folks here today. So if I'm a cow-calf producer, the way in a perfect U.S. CattleTrace system here today, the way that the system would work is for purely ADT contact tracing purposes, we'd want those cattle tagged with an RFID tag once they leave your ranch. So your ranch, you're not taking cattle in, accepting cattle, any of that. Maybe some of you are, but for the most part, the cattle that we raise, they're with those, their friends from day one, and then from that time, then they move to the auction market, and if we talk about the typical flow of cattle in the U.S. market today. So that's the first time they're commingled around other cattle at that point. So ideally there would be a reader at that facility that, pushes data to U.S. CattleTrace. We'd know then all these cattle were mixed and mingled with each other from that point. And then from there, we'd hopefully have a reader network built out, within feed yards across the country there that really work within that regard. So we would know once those cattle left where they were read at those facilities. So if a disease were to occur somewhere in between, or if a disease were to present itself, that's probably a better way to word that. If a disease were to present itself in an animal, we would be able to do a contact trace on the cattle that has been around within a certain time period based upon a disease incubation. So we could go back to that facility, see what other cattle they were around, and then where they went to within their life cycle chain. So that would be and then ultimately once they leave the feed yard, they would go to a packing plant, as you all well know, and we would know they're retired out of the beef, the cattle part of their life, and are turning into the beef supply chain. So why is it important? I think that's the bigger question. All you guys are probably sitting here today. So I'm going to showcase that one on the right. This used to be pre-COVID, and I think it's probably now true again today, as long as all of our airplane flights are working correctly. That was the flight pattern of the U.S. You can see how globally connected we are across the whole world. And then over here on the left-hand side, this is a map of foot and mouth disease where it's currently present in the world today. So if I were to take a line and kind of draw it right across there, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse or not, but 2/3 of the world has foot and mouth disease today, where it's either endemic, sporadic, not known, or maybe, free with vaccination, some of those different sorts. The greens there, it's either never reported or currently free. So if we look at North America here and up into the Greenland, Iceland, we are free without vaccination. We have not had foot and mouth disease in the U.S. since 1929. So why to participate? The whole premise of this, when we came out and talked about building a pilot project, was we really wanted to protect our industry. We wanted to help create a tool and work collaboratively with animal health officials with this effort, U.S. CattleTrace, by really providing a quick and accurate contact tracing platform that was really easy for producers to utilize, but also easy for animal health officials to utilize there as well. So we'd also wanted to look at that feeder fed cattle market that's not covered under the current rule today. We want to be that voluntary system, producer-led, that's really hands-free and that can include feeder cattle and work with the way those cattle flow today. Today we would not, I put that in there, be able to quickly and accurately provide that. If we had an economically significant disease, a large-scale TB outbreak or brucellosis outbreak, but even more importantly, foot and mouth disease, which spreads way more rapidly than COVID-19 did, we would be significantly hindered in our ability to hold on to the share of the protein market that we have today. I was talking the other day to a person that was writing an article for one of our other good IGS friends out there, another breed article, and I said, what's worse is, in COVID-19, we did some things. We shut some parts of the country down that really hindered our ability economically to do a lot of different things, that put some people out of business. So put that in our mindset with foot and mouth disease. If we were not able to quickly respond to an outbreak, not only would we lose all that export market, the public perception of a significant disease outbreak within the highest quality, best tasting protein market out there, that would hinder our public perception and ability to make it as a lot of cow-calf producers. By no means don't take that as fear mongering. I think that's just the fact and reality of where we would be. That it would shut our country down and shut our protein segment down far worse than the COVID-19 pandemic proved for all of us as cattle producers out there. I put this slide up here for our participation and support. You guys can read through that. We do have a membership model that we launched in January of 2021, and that's really to get people involved and engaged. Anybody that could be negatively impacted by a disease outbreak, we wanted them to be able to have their voice heard within it. The voting members of CattleTrace will always be the producers. It's producer-led. They're the ones pushing the data into the system. Even though we're not taking any personal identifiable information, we're just doing those 4 data points. It's still their information at the end of the day. And so they get to vote on the board of directors and have their voice be heard through those board of directors. And so you can see the other areas of membership there, some folks that think this is important today, and we're very fortunate for their support. So with that, Bailey, that's kind of the end of my slide there. I'd be happy to take any questions at that time to really discuss what maybe some of your members might be interested in.
Thank you, Callahan, very much. I'm going to go ahead and we'll let Chip and Mia jump in with questions. We'll wrap back around. I'll ask some too, but it looks like Chip is ready then. Let him start.
No, I was just going to say thank you, and I'm actually going to defer to Mia and let her fire up if she wishes. But thank you, Callahan. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. That was great. I think sometimes, you mentioned earlier can you kind of maybe explain a little bit more to the kids about, they might say, well, so my show heifer, if I take a show heifer somewhere, they're traced, but my feeder calf isn't. Can you just kind of give them a little more info on how that works exactly, why one might be and the other one might not?
Yeah, good point. So I'm going to put myself in, I'm going to go purely from a seed stock producer here. So we obviously all probably send cattle to, to the feedlot in some form or fashion, whether we send them to the auction market or we feed our own cattle out, whatever that may be through that area. And so when we think about it, so our seed stock cattle right now, to move across state lines, they have to be over 18 months. So by that point, they are within their breeding life cycle, our bulls or our females at that point, or the cattle we move across state lines. So, our replacement heifers, the reason we all put those metal clips, those Banks tags in today, we'll start to transition those into some RFID tags for this purpose of a quicker traceability system. But the reason that they have to have that official form of ID is because they're moving across state lines there at that point. Now, if they're, feeder cattle destined for the feedlot at that point, they don't currently have to have any form of official ID to move or to go to a feedlot at that point. So that's a significant amount of cattle that travel across state lines. I live in Kansas. We have a lot of feed yards and packing plants here in the state of Kansas and Southwest Kansas primarily. So we have a bunch of trucks running up and down the interstate every day on with those cattle, and they don't have to be required by that point. So if you think about it, when with all of us, where do we get sick the most? When we're traveling a bunch around people we're not used to, different situations like that. Cattle are no different when they start moving around some of those areas. So if a economically significant disease were to present itself in that situation, that's where the most rapid spread would probably occur at that point. And so that's why we started focusing on that segment of the industry to begin with. And it's also the most challenging, right? They move a lot. And so a lot of passive, I'm going to call it passive type reading of that. The reason ultra high frequency that you can read a larger distance like those K tags is important because, we run a lot of cattle through an auction market. We ship a lot of cattle to feed yards every day. A lot of cattle get through packing plants a day. Having the ability to read those cattle kind of in the background needs to be really important. And so slowing cattle down and running them through a single file becomes harder in those feeder cattle. And so because of those challenges, that's where we started there and why we believe it's so important still to this day. Hope that kind of answers that question there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. I just have one other question. Looking at the map that you showed and had some of the states that I guess you could say were on board and some states that aren't. Some of those states maybe that aren't on board, are you close to getting some of those, working with them? What's what does that look like?
Great question. So the map that I currently showed there, and I could probably pull it back up maybe, but it's okay. We can send it on to those folks we need, and it's on our website if you guys would like to see that there as well, uscattletrace.org. And so that map would be basically any form or fashion a producer, a business, an organization that wanted to get involved with U.S. Cattle Trace and saw it was important. So we are continuing to try to fill that map, have it to be all continental 48 states, and maybe even Alaska or Hawaii. I did volunteer to my board that I'd go bang down some doors in Hawaii if they needed me to get them on board with U.S. Cattle Trace. They didn't think that was a great spend of money, but we'll get them there eventually. But getting those states on board, it was a lot of producers and organizations and so on that we really wanted to focus on pulling into that area. And so as we continue to build that out, that'll be important. Kind of our next big push as we transition here is to work really collaboratively with all those 50 state animal health departments, though. We are to a point where our database is ready to roll, and we have to continue to build that out to make it a robust system for them, since they're the ones ultimately using it at the end of the day. So really making sure that we have a great system that works for them creates kind of that pull through for us, right? We want to be a part of a system that they're ultimately going to use, so that way we can resume business operations if, God forbid, a disease ever were to hit quicker. So that's really important to all of us at that point. And so building those states those relationships out has been critical with producers and organizations, and continuing there with those state animal health officials will be really important for us there as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in here quick before Chip. I've got a comment. Thank you. A number of these participants for the SPC have either met Chip before or know Chip, so I really appreciate that you called him old in there. That was good. I like that. And my first question for you is, so what happens, just practically speaking, a producer, so a lot of these kids have calves that they're selling from their farms, their family farms. They put that tag in, then what happens? What are the next steps happen with that calf? Are those producers getting any information back? What's that look like?
That's a great thing. So we're, as seed stock producers, we're in the business of collecting information and bettering our operations, right, Chip? I mean, that's kind of the whole premise of how we get better. You talk a lot about that with your work and what you do with ASA and IGS there as well. And I think what becomes a harder concept here, Bailey, within animal disease traceability is once you put the tag in, you've done your job at that point for animal disease traceability. Now, I say that, I'm going to preface it, within CattleTrace and animal disease traceability, put the tag in. Hopefully we've done our job building out the reader network, and we'd be able to pull off a trace if we ever needed to, with your animal or other animals out there within the supply chain. Now, the neat part about that technology is you can do so much more with it. So if we wanted to do some information gathering, if we wanted to utilize a herd management software system there, a lot of them are utilizing that RFID technology, either low frequency or ultra high frequency. So you could utilize that information on your herd. A lot of feed yards are utilizing it out there today for their operation, whether it's drug health management there when they're doctoring cattle, or even within some of these NHTC type programs as well. They're utilizing that to hold the information on that animal. Not all occurs outside of CattleTrace and ADT. But it is the neat part about that technology. And I forgot to mention, a lot of auction markets are starting to utilize that for some clerking information there as well. And I think that's important, within their operations as well. So you can do a lot more with that tag within the system for CattleTrace for the pure purpose of data security, data privacy, and ADT. And once you put that tag in, you've done your job once they leave your ranch. We do encourage, if you want to utilize it for more than just ADT, to explore those options. And we try to make those connections with those companies that do that to the best of our ability.
So those producers that put those tags in, they're going through, and those calves are catching your all's readers. Do those producers, can they see where those calves have hit at, or not once they're out of their hands?
They have not within the CattleTrace system. Obviously, they can know maybe if they work hard enough, but that's just like they can today, right? Within the CattleTrace system, it is securely locked up. So if we go back to the readers that I talked about, those readers do a one-way push of data into the U.S. CattleTrace system. So it's not a two-way flow. It's just this animal was under this reader at this date and time, right up to the CattleTrace cloud-based database, and it's securely locked away, only to be utilized in case of disease outbreak. There's a lot of strict security permissions that even I have as a staff person there as well, and how that works. And so that's really important to us, that the data can't be shared as much as we would love for it to, for folks that want to use it judiciously. Think about it like a highway system. Hopefully we're building the infrastructure by doing this, and incorporating readers, putting tags in here, so on and so forth. Over here at CattleTrace on the left off ramp, we just take those 4 data points for ADT. But over here on this right off ramp, you can do so much more with that technology if you connect the dots with the softwares and database and technologies that are out there for yourself and your operation there as well. There's an interesting one out there that's trying to utilize blockchain within this reader network and push, if cow-calf producers like us want to push information up the supply chain. I've had this vaccination. I've bought these genetics. I've collected carcass information. I know how they're going to grade, but I don't want to feed them myself. If I want to push that up the supply chain, this is a blockchain company that's currently out there. The thought process is hopefully they'll push the carcass data back down the supply chain there as well. And so there's some interesting concepts and companies out there that are pretty new and fresh, but I think that have some promise in terms of this ever-growing world of data transfer and sharing out there, especially for us as seed stock producers.
Thank you.
Callahan, so I don't know if it's readily doable for you to throw your slide set back up. If you can,
I'm gonna try my best.
ask you to, because you showed a visual that I think is pretty important. Your second slide, I'd love to see your second slide.
Okay.
As you pull that second slide up, the export value slide, I believe, I think that was the second one.
Sure.
You described something that I think, for one, is super important for the young folks and their parents to recognize that, like it or not, as you said, 450 bucks, nearly 450 bucks. The reality is the export value is hugely important. If we suck the export value out of the beef business today, everybody better be prepared overnight to change the way they live, the way they function, their expenditures on their place, right? Because it's going to suck a huge amount of value. And so given that, and you see this chart in front of us, a lot of the young folks, I think, would find interesting the story of the Christmas cow. You and I know that terminology. They probably think of it as show heifer they got when they were 9. We might think of it in a different way. So do you mind giving us a little primer on why that dip there around 03?
Yeah, let's look at this time period here in that major dip. So we were steadily building, as you guys can see there. So we think back to the 90s, and we talk about beef demand really in general. Beef demand was kind of waning in the early 90s. This is when we really started focusing on, for all of us and Bailey and I, and younger than that, we've just always been a part of, better quality, better tasting cattle. That's always been a push for us as producers. But back in the early 90s, guys, beef demand was really starting to wane. It was, they did a big study out there that, was, about taste of beef and so on and so forth. And we really had to put a focus on that, programs like U.S. premium beef and so on, kind of helped change those dynamics, made that pull through to where we were growing beef demand. So you start looking at that, we're up on an uphill slide there, and then boom, dropped right down there in that 03 timeframe, like Chip said there. Why was that? We had what Chip mentioned there, a cow that stole Christmas. It was a cow that had BSE up in Washington State, and it came from Canada eventually, and it was an isolated case. But we couldn't prove it quick enough. It was BSE. The U.S. has BSE. That was the only thing that our export trading partners knew. So as you know, it just boom, every door started getting shut in our face. We're not taking your beef. We're not taking your beef. We're not taking your beef. And that was a big thing. It took us, we were fairly quick, if you think about the time frame, but when you say like a month, that's not quick enough with export markets. You guys might remember when we got back into Japan, it took us 13 years to get back into Japan. It was up in this 2016 time frame. So if you think about a country, it took us a month or less to figure out this was an isolated case of one cow who came from Canada that was going to be processed in Washington. Think about it, foot and mouth disease happened. I'm not kidding, guys. This disease spreads like wildfire. We've studied a lot of things about it. It spreads way more rapidly than COVID does, and it doesn't affect the beef cattle in terms of mortality or anything. But the public perception and what that looks like, it would be very poor for the beef cattle industry. And so, we have not done a lot. If I show you what our ADT system, we look at that 2013, what we did there. Remember, we're still missing all these feeder cattle there. We've really only made one step in our traceability system since that cow that stole Christmas, and that's that 2013 just for breeding cattle and cattle that move across, cattle for exhibition that move across state lines. Those feeder cattle, they're still as exposed as they were back in 2003 when this occurred. So that export market value, like Chip mentioned, something as significant as that, it happens again. We saw how things were tight and lean the last couple of years for cow-calf producers. Imagine that without all this export value, like Chip mentioned there. That would be very detrimental to our industry, and really, frankly, our future within the protein segment as a whole. You know, we're fighting chickens can't get foot and mouth disease. They can get high path avian influenza, which they're fighting right now, but they can't get FMD, and they can reproduce chickens a lot faster than we can reproduce cattle at that point. And so when we look at our share of the protein segment, if we not only do we lose the export value there, but the future of that would be very detrimental. So Chip is correct. That cow was kind of a eye opener, but not it's far enough in the rearview mirror for some people forget about it and the importance that, you know, protecting our industry kind of makes. We got to keep that on the front of our mind until we get a good, robust system in place for us as producers.
And Callahan, just to dovetail off those really good comments, even though I would tell you when you look to the older portions of this graph, so the numbers are smaller, so sometimes maybe changes are a little muted when you compare them with the big tall red lines on the right. But if you look at that dip from, you know, down into 04, that was well over a 50% reduction. Now,
right.
Think about that percentile wise. If we had a 50% reduction in export value from 2022, that would be a massive economic blow. So think about it in terms of the relative scale it is in its particular spot. And then you combine that with the fact that the Australian beef market, which geographically is much closer to many of the folks who are paying these dollars, is a much more sophisticated beef business today. They mirror the U.S. model much closer in terms of their grading system, in terms of their beef quality. And so while right now they have some drought issues and all that, they have some of their own challenges. One of the opportunities, I just use Australia, but there are other places as well, should we stumble on such an issue, there are other folks who are very well positioned where they probably weren't in 05, 06, 07, to come in and steal some of that market share. And once you take that market share with a product that's deliverable and cost effective, it's distinctly possible we don't get that back, or it's a long time coming. As a novelty, I would throw out, Callahan, you might not know this, I'm not going to use specific names, but actually the first U.S. beef allowed back into Japan was because of an outfit that was very aggressive on the forefront of using technology. At the time, it was EID technology, doing the best they could. Actually, was a Simmental outfit. In case you didn't know, again, I won't reference who they are, but some might know who they were. Was the first beef let back into that country because they were trying to be progressive. I'm going to ask one more question and then I'll be quiet. You referenced two different sort of technologies. You referenced ultra high frequency and low frequency. Both have their strengths and weaknesses, and again, not looking to take sides per se, but do you mind helping the young folks and us understand what those two technologies do, how they differ, those sort of things?
Yeah, great point there, Chip. I will kind of talk through those. And so I pulled the slide back up here. So low frequency, you guys will know these as button tags. Everybody knows those as the button tags. Those have been around for almost 30 years at this point. They are a very effective form of ID in terms of retention in the year. They stay in there really well. We can scan those with the reader, but you only get about 18 inches of read range with that. So, sometimes you got to bang the reader against the tag to even read it. But, those cattle have to be in a single file, or they have to be restrained to be able to read those tags. And so, that would be the negatives of that, right? The cattle have to flow through a single file. We think about some of our large Midwestern to Western livestock auction markets. We're running through 2,500 to 3,000 to 5,000, 6,000 head a day. That severely limits their ability to read those cattle at that point. But it's still a good form, especially for us as seed stock producers. Works really good for what we do there in collecting carcass data and some of those different forms and fashions. Ultra high frequency is a relatively novel technology within the cattle industry. It's been around for about 10 to 15 years at this point, really starting to just catch its stride now. This tag can be read up to almost 30 feet. You can see this in the bottom picture. This would be ultra high frequency readers. You'll see two panel readers there on the side in this drover's alley, and then two up top. You can read 1, 2, 10, 100,000 cattle as they flow through that alleyway, and it's just picking them up all the way through within that, just like it is on the K-Tag tool system up there above. There was some issues with how they read and with some metal and so on and so forth when they first came out, but they're starting to pretty much catch their stride and know what those what the limitations of that is. Also, I think another added benefit that ultra high frequency brings, and that I always have as my seed stock hat on there, is the fact that they have we have the ability to read or to customize those tags from a visual sense. That chip that they put in it, you can't put it down into a small button yet. The chip has to be kind of a larger chip set within that. So you have to put it in a panel tag like we tag our cattle with from a visual sense. So you could customize that with your ranch color, your logo, your numbering system, whatever. We all have different numbering systems out there. You could customize that on your ranch there and kind of kill two birds with one stone there in that format. But that would be kind of the two big differences within those technologies. From our standpoint at U.S. CattleTrace, if we look towards a hands-free kind of speed of commerce for ADT purposes within each segment of the industry, ultra high frequency probably offers more benefits just because it doesn't inhibit some segments of the industry. But certainly low frequency offers a tremendous amount of benefits in its own right, and works very well within cow-calf operations, the packing plant, feed yards there as well. So certainly some pros and cons there, but I think that for the future, potentially maybe there's a dual frequency tag even out there where you have a ultra high frequency and a button that all tied into one, and no matter what reader they're going under, it's able to read that tag. So there's a lot of new and exciting technologies out there, and the progression of that will be a fun one to watch for us as we can continue to gather more information and become better producers.
Thank you, Callahan. That was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chip. I appreciate it.
While you have slides up, if you would bump back to the one where you have the other countries listed that have traceabilities compared to the export market, what do the traceability systems look like in some of these other countries? How are they managing this?
Good question. I'm gonna pull up kind of some better examples here. So we look at Brazil and Australia, kind of our two big competitors. When we look out there on the global market, Australia's is probably the better well-known system. So they do have low frequency. We've had ironically a couple producers come over to the U.S. this summer and talk to us and say, man, we wish we wouldn't have pigeonholed ourselves with low frequency because we really like the benefits of low frequency out there in the marketplace today. And excuse me, I'm trying to get out of that. Really getting into the marketplace today. And so, they see a lot of those benefits, but Australia kind of has a similar type system. They don't have maybe the full scale contact tracing, but they know, this animal was here and then it moved to here. Theirs is a little more hands-on within the paperwork that producers have to submit, whereas ours is we're trying to really get it to be a passive hands-free type of system. They even have to submit movements from pasture to pasture and ranch to pasture and so on and so forth. And so, that's really intense and in depth from a traceability perspective. And, they actually have foot and mouth disease knocking on their door. It's in Indonesia right now. And it's a big traffic time for folks, or I guess they're kind of wrapped up with it now, but they travel back and forth quite a bit there across the way. And they're really worried that somebody's going to accidentally bring that into the country. So that's one that's, kind of a system out there. Canada, our trading partners to the north, theirs is kind of a bookend system. Record the calf at birth, record when that one's out of the system. So they don't have the movements in between. They just have, okay, this one was here, it got tagged with this tag. If that tag happens to fall out at any point, wherever it's at in the segment of the industry, they put a new tag in and submit that to the CCIA is what they call it. And then once that animal is retired, they know that animal's out of the system. So they don't have the ability to contact trace to that extent, but they do have a traceability system that's mandatory up there in that regard. Brazil's one that I'm less versed on in that area. I do believe they have a system in place. I don't know how robust it is within it, but it would be kind of somewhere in between Australia and Canada there in terms of their requirements. So that would be kind of some of the big ones to just kind of pick off of the map there of those other countries that we, compete with in the global market.
Thank you. That is very helpful, I think. And my last question for you is something that we try to highlight for the young people part of the SPC with our different speakers. And so that's, what's the future look like in this very specific part of the beef sector? What kind of opportunities are there for these kids moving forward?
Yeah, I think we kind of have two roadmaps moving forward, guys, honestly, within the animal disease traceability, if that's what you're asking about specifically. If I were to grab my magic 8-ball and tell you what I think is moving forward in the disease traceability realm, I think we kind of have two paths forward. We can continue to do things the way we've always done them, go, wow, this is really important, and then we go outside and start working on our cattle and we forget about it, that quickly. Or we could and be kind of at risk. We're really at risk there. As you guys saw, if a foreign animal disease were to hit, it would change our lives overnight. We would not be able to start business operations as we know it quickly. They will do the same thing we did with COVID. They will land the airplanes, lock it down, try to get their arms wrapped around it. And you guys know what that's like for cattle flow. And that's only some states. Some states may continue to let it run. And that's a big challenge and dichotomy we have across the U.S. right now. There's no standardization of those cattle, from a feeder cattle perspective across state lines. And so that's one thing I think that is a big push within the country, within those regulatory animal health officials, is to try to standardize that. If we continue to just do things the way we've always done them, or say this is a big nuisance to me, not kind of try to be proactive, we have a lot of areas within the beef cattle industry where we've been really reactive as an industry. I think we did a good job jumping out about the fake meat train, but there's been a lot of opportunities where we could have been proactive in other certain hot topics within the cattle industry that we've been really reactive. This is a unique opportunity to be proactive, build a system that works for us as cow guys and gals, to work out there, within our industry, and also protect us at that same time. I think that if we could do that, we have a unique opportunity to kind of bolster ourselves as being, really unique, kind of building the system that's the global standard within the U.S. And at the same time, we have the highest quality, best tasting protein out there in the world, and we're also the most secure and protected. Imagine what that export slide could look like if we could make those claims here today, guys. That would be, we could even see a significant jump. Chip talked about, a 50% decrease. If we could make those claims that we have a really secure, safe system, if something were to occur and we could prove that it worked in that good of a regard, I think we could even see those export, values jump into the future there as well. So unique opportunities and exciting times, I think, as long as we kind of put those proactive hats on to move forward in that realm within the industry, I think we have some exciting things on the horizon.
Chip, is there anything else that you have?
I just say thank you very much. I've enjoyed it. I think the young folks are not only going to take a lot away from this, I think it's going to stimulate a lot of thought and what ifs for them. And the last thing I'll say, other than thank you, is I kind of liked my old Atlas. It felt kind of gratifying.
I'm glad you liked it, Chip. Do you still have it?
No, I wish I did.
See, Chip transition, guys. We can transition from the old way we've always done things to the new way as well with traceability.
Proof.
Well, thank you very much, Callahan. It's been a pleasure. I would echo Chip's comments. I think the participants are really going to enjoy this and give them something new to think about. Thank you very much. And
thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, guys.